Tired of serving up the same old tasteless victuals to your family? Step up your grill game with new seasonings from Cloy's Southern Eats. Based off famous Southern recipes, our seasonings will add what's been missing to your family's feast. Add it to steak, chicken, shrimp, you name it. Serving up these fixings is going to make you the hero at home. So head on over to CloysSouthernEats.com and order yours today. Come get you some.
And everybody, welcome to a Hogville.net YouTube live special with national columnist Connor O'Gara from Saturday Down South. Let's go ahead and bring him in. Connor, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing really well. I'm in a better place than I think a lot of Arkansas fans are right now, and my heart goes out to them during this very unfortunate time because I know that watching an offensive line struggle this much, I can't imagine there are many things that are tougher to stomach than watching that, especially with how high that standard has been in years past.
It really has. And last couple of years, you've seen the Razorback team really kind of flourish in September, fade a little bit in October, then kind of make that comeback in November. This year, really, it's been kind of it's like a carryover from October of last year into September, really, because there's some deficiencies that, and I know the coaching staff has really kind of tried to not look past, but try to fix a little bit during the summer. But it's kind of reared its ugly head over these last 3 games.
Yeah, it looks like a team right now that is so desperate for answers and just doesn't know where to turn. And you can say, oh, you got to mix things up on the offensive line. Usually you're only doing that if you're dealing with injuries and you're plugging in this guy here, this guy there.
Mm-hmm.
And to think that they have so many issues up front is just such a frustrating thing. Obviously because of what Sam Pittman does best, and that is coach up an offensive line. And you see a game like Texas A&M where it doesn't even matter that Rocket Sanders is back. He doesn't have a chance back there. There's really nothing they can do to get him going other than hope he pops one on a screen or something. But those running lanes just aren't there. KJ in this new offense with Dan Enos, which I like in theory, but I am seeing the issues obviously play out because if you can't protect him and those tackle spots are just such a liability, it just makes that such an uphill climb. And it feels like a matter of time before he takes that hit that sidelines him. And then this season goes from bad to worse. And I think that's the area where I think Arkansas fans are right to feel upset. 15 tackles for loss allowed by a Sam Pittman coach team. It is just crazy to think about how far that group has fallen off.
He talked a little bit on Monday about his, no hand or his hands-off approach really with his assistants in each one of those rooms. And I feel like after last weekend, it kind of forced his hand to step into that offensive line room and just kind of reevaluate with Cody Kennedy and say, this is what we're going to have to do. And that's why you see, with Patrick Kudus moving from right tackle to center, which he's played center before. And then you see also center move over to right guard. And, that's one of the things that you start to look at, and you almost feel like he's reaching. You also have Dominic Johnson that's now splitting time between running back and at tight end, because really, honestly, he's probably their best blocker they have, because you've seen Rocket miss protection reads and miss blocks. You've also seen that with Rashad Dubinion as well. And whenever you're missing those protections, and I know that KJ has had a lot of frustration with communication, and that's what they're trying to pare down a little bit, to get that communication between, offensive center and also with quarterback, and trying to get those protections correct. But it just seems like I don't know exactly what they're going to be able to do to fix that.
They're desperate. Any 60-minute stretch where it looks decent, that's what they're going to stick with moving forward. Even if it's against lesser competition, they are desperate. You're shuffling the deck. And look, Sam Pittman, he talked about this in the offseason leading in. He said, yeah, we got Brady Latham, we got Bo Limmer. It's an experience around that. And you're seeing why even a group that you feel like has two anchors is still needing to have continuity and is still only as good as its weakest member. And teams are attacking Arkansas in a way that I don't think you could attack them in years past. Now, that's not to say that it was a bad idea to transition away from this Kendall Briles offense to the Dan Enos offense. I signed off on that. I said, look, Kendall Briles, he wanted to go to TCU. He wanted to, he spent enough time flirting. I talked to Sam Pittman about that, and having Dan Enos ready to go just in case something did happen. And this was the transition that they felt was one that they could make at this stage of KJ Jefferson's career. And I don't really think it's been that. And yeah, there have been issues at times where you can tell some of the processing is just off. But when your clock is sped up and you don't feel like you can actually step up in the pocket and make some of these reads because you're just trying to stay afloat and keep a play alive, it really hinders your development in that area. So yeah, it is unfortunate. It feels like Arkansas is wasting the prime pre-draft seasons of KJ Jefferson, Rocket Sanders. Now, obviously, those guys still have eligibility left. KJ, people forget, can still come back for another year if he wanted to.
His COVID year, yep.
Yeah, so who knows how that's going to play out. He wasn't exactly definitive on that subject when asked about it at SEC Media Days, I remember, and who knows, maybe he's going to want to come back and show that he's an even better player, or maybe he'll say, you know what, why do I need to keep taking all these hits? I have the size, the physicality to maybe go to the NFL.
Yeah, and honestly, one of the players that he really has reminded me of, and I know that there's a lot of comparisons with him and Cam Newton, but
hate that. I love KJ.
I know, I
love
do
KJ.
too.
And he's my QB1 in the SEC. I hate that. I've talked to Gary Danielson about that. I've said, please stop. Please stop comparing him to Cam Newton. They are very different players.
They are very different players. He actually reminds me more of a Dwayne Haskins type. That's one of the players that I've watched Dwayne play at Ohio State, and you can really kind of extrapolate his intangibles with KJ's intangibles. And that's one of the players that I saw. And you saw how, with his progression through the NFL before his untimely death. But, Dwayne was really starting to make some moves there in Pittsburgh. And I was looking forward to seeing what he was able to do. But, with the life situation happening. But I think that KJ, if he gets in front of the right team, and that, as well as I do, that that's exactly what it comes down to when you get into the NFL, is you get into the right system. That's something that somebody may be able to take a chance on him on like a 4th or a 5th round and say, let's see where we might be able to go with this guy.
I think so too. And I'll go with a different comp. Somebody who also went to college in the state of Ohio and played for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think he's got some early Ben Roethlisberger in him. I think when Ben was a little bit more mobile and he can just shake off dudes and extend plays, that to me is when KJ is at his best. Maybe he's going to be at his best this weekend against that Ole Miss front that has been a little bit up and down, but they still have a lot of guys that can get in backfield, get after the quarterback.
Yep.
I think they have 20 guys that have registered a TFL this year in Pete Golding's defense. But that's kind of the comp that I see. Obviously, the arm talent is not quite at that level, of course, and things that Ben was doing in college. There's a reason why even at a small school like Miami of Ohio, he was still a first-round pick. But I am interested in seeing what it's going to look like and how he's evaluated at the next level, because the transition to this more pro style system was supposed to help him in that regard. He was going to be making more of those post snap reads that you see in the NFL. And I think it's so hard to judge. I don't think he's necessarily helped his draft stock as much as I thought he was going to in this scheme, in this system, because of how much that offensive line has been a liability. And I'm not saying that he would be a first round pick if he had some world beater offensive line that was about to win the Joe Moore Award, but I do think that he will be probably in that conversation, and he won't be a guy that if he goes to the NFL, he's going to have that initial buzz, especially with how deep this quarterback class looks. But it might be one of those situations where the more teams kind of dig into this, they say, you know what, maybe that's worth a flyer in that the fifth round or something like that, because of what he can bring to the table. And if he can hold a clipboard for a couple of years, who knows? That's the type of guy that you just want to bring in. I think he's such an easy guy to rally around with his style, his grittiness, and that's why I've always loved KJ.
Yeah, and I think whenever Dan came into this on campus last year or last off season and started kind of putting out his idea to KJ, Rocket, offensive staff, everybody, it felt like he had the answers that he saw where there were some holes with Kendall Bryle's offense. What they didn't expect was, I feel, and I made this analogy last week or last Sunday, was I feel like this is like a scene from Vegas Vacation where they're going through the Hoover Dam, and Clark puts his finger on that hole, and another spring leak comes out, and he puts his hand on it and puts some gum on another one, and a third one comes out. And I feel like that's kind of where this offensive staff is through 5 games.
It's definitely not Rusty saying, oh, yeah, put in a quarter, I want another car. I put in a quarter, I want another car.
Exactly.
Definitely not that. They have not hit the lottery with this scheme change so far. But, I thought there was going to be a transition. And we knew the rushing, it was going to look different. It was almost unfair to come into this season with what we've seen through the first 3 years of the Sam Pittman era from a ground game perspective, because that was not going to be the standard for this group. The volume itself, with the way that they were going to execute tempo, was going to be different. And I don't know, maybe you could factor in some of the new rules and that was going to change things. But I think that we were going to need to dial back our expectations. And look, it's a reminder that one, scheme changes are hard. Go ask Mississippi State fans about that right now. You're seeing that transition and why that has been so difficult for Will Rogers in a one-of-one system that he was in with Mike Leach in the air raids, now going to a little bit more of a pro style, a lot more of the pistol that Kevin Barbet wants to be able to execute after coming over from App State. And you're seeing scheme changes are hard, and no scheme is perfect. Like, look around college football right now. You can go up and down. The number one offense in college football last year is Tennessee, right? Tennessee replaces the Blitnikoff Award winner Jalen Hyatt, another day 2 receiver Cedric Tillman. You replace your best quarterback since Peyton Manning in Hendon Hooker. And oh, by the way, a top 10 pick at tackle in Darnell Wright, who went to my Chicago Bears, who are right now in the toilet. You replaced all those pieces. And there was still an expectation with Josh Heupel, who had 5 consecutive top 8 scoring offenses. Hey, we're not changing the scheme. So what? We've got a new offensive play caller and Joey Halsley after Alex Golesh went to USF. We're going to be fine. We're going to figure this out. No big deal. That offense has holes. They run the football really well, but they have a lot of holes, and they're struggling to get the passing game going. Ohio State is having their offensive issues. No scheme change is perfect. No offense year to year feels foolproof. And I think you're seeing this play out, obviously, in a more significant way in Fayetteville.
You really are. One of the bright spots, though, with this team so far is the defense. So Sam talked about this yesterday in his press conference, that he can't remember the last time he had a defense that had 3 pick sixes. And not only that, but through 5 games, they lead the nation right now in pick sixes, and they're 12th in the nation or I think it was 12th in the nation with 12 interceptions, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere right around that number. And the defense has been pretty opportunistic this year. They've also got see what is that? I do believe it was 4 fumbles also for recovery. So the defense has been pretty opportunistic in putting the offense in good hands or in good spots in the field. But the problem is that they just keep coming away with field goals.
Yeah, and you got banged up in that A&M game too, with
Yeah.
obviously the injury to Morgan, who was just a very scary situation. I was amazed that Pittman said, "Yeah, he might actually play on Saturday." I was like, "What?" Like,
Yeah.
all right, that's great news. That's about as good a news as you could have hoped for. McLaughrin dealing with a concussion after he had that pick six. He's been great to start off the year. They're being put in better spots. I think you could see that last year. It wasn't all. What's a nice way to say this? When Jalen Catalon went down last year, I don't think it was fair to say that their defensive issues were strictly because of that, despite the fact that it looked like you and I could have thrown for a 40-yard pass against that Arkansas secondary. I
Yeah.
don't think it was fair to say that was the byproduct of this guy going down or that guy going down. I think you saw the issues with Barry Odom's defense, and the irony is that it lacked a pass rush before. We're just talking about plugging holes and how it feels like you plug one hole and then another hole springs free. And
Yeah.
Arkansas had looked like it figured out the pass rush issues with Drew Sanders and Bumper Pool playing at the level that they were playing at. Jordan Dominic, a guy that was playing really well. And obviously you miss him this year after he transferred to Colorado. But I looked at that group this year and I thought, okay, can Travis Williams just put him in better spots? Just get that. Yeah, you don't have to sell your soul to be able to rush the passer. You should be able to contain. And Sam Pittman said when he first hired him that he was kind of nervous hearing about the risks that they were going to take and the turnovers that they were going to try and force.
Yeah.
And that I think is held true so far. And I think you've done some things really well. I'm not going to fault him too much for the issues that they had in Baton Rouge against an LSU passing game. That's one of the best in college football. I won't necessarily fault them for that. Some of the plays that A&M was making in that game too, like A&M's got a really good offense and they made them earn it. I mean, the 2 throws that you saw from Max Johnson to Evan Stewart in that game, you're like, all right, like you'll give them that. That's tough. It's really hard to defend that. But I think they've been put in a lot better spots, and you kind of feel bad for this defense because they have made the improvements that you hope that they would. It's still not a lights out passing defense or anything like that, but I think the improvements you've seen against the run and the areas where they've been a little bit more balanced despite some of those injuries, I think has been promising.
Yeah, let's look at this matchup that Arkansas has coming up on Saturday against Ole Miss. Last year, Arkansas gave up 703 yards of offense to Ole Miss, but they only scored 27 points. And a really cold night that you saw some of the announcers, they were getting up into the stands, they were eating popcorn with the fans. I mean, it was more of a real love fest with SEC Network and the Razorbacks and all that good stuff. You fast forward to this year, Arkansas does have an opportunity offensively to put up some big numbers because you saw them go against the LSU defense and they were able to put up 31 points. And then last week, you see LSU go in there and put up 49 points and 637 yards of offense. You almost have to kind of feel good, even though if Arkansas does make some of those changes, that they will be able to move the ball because they were able to also against LSU, which Ole Miss was able to do last week.
Yeah, I mean, Ole Miss's defense was a train wreck. They were so bad. That was kind of vintage Kiffin type game with how much they struggled to slow down LSU. Again, a very prolific LSU passing attack. But the issue that I worry about for Arkansas, Ole Miss can still get in the backfield. It's not like they lack dudes up front. They've kind of rebuilt that defensive front in the transfer portal and the way that they've been able to do that over the course of the last couple of years. And they've got a bunch of different guys that will blow up plays in the backfield if Arkansas's offensive line does not have its best game. It's kind of crazy to think this matchup the last 2 years, both teams have run for at least 300 yards in each of the last 2 games of this matchup. I don't expect that to be the case. Don't expect that to be the case. And maybe that's the good news if you're an Arkansas fan, is that defensively you feel much better about this run defense. The Ole Miss offensive line is has really struggled up until that game against LSU. Quinshon Judkins has not had the start. I know he was in the same conversations coming into this season as Rocket, obviously the two leading rushers in the SEC last year. And it was like Judkins was getting more love coming in because he was, the freshman, wasn't dealing with the scheme change or anything like that. But it's been a rough go. That Arkansas defensive line could actually have a nice day against an Ole Miss front that's been pretty up and down. But yeah, it is a matchup that's going to feel a lot different. And I hope for the sake of Arkansas fans and for the sake of my own personal entertainment, that KJ puts on his cape the same way that he did 2 years ago. That's when I fell in love with KJ. Like, truly, when you see him take off from the 5-yard line in this game and that guy just laying it all out on the line, like, to me, that is what makes him such a fun player. But it's hard to really get on board with that. I said in my Saturday Down South podcast, I think Ole Miss wins this game by 3 scores, just because there's just not enough faith in what Arkansas's offense has looked like so far. And that's probably the biggest issue that I'm running into for the underdogs.
Yes, I'm kind of in the same boat you are. We had an article posted for the local newspaper here, and my prediction was going to be 48-28 Ole Miss. I mean, I'm not going to sit there and homer this thing to death, because you have to look at and not only what's on the paper, but you also have to look at what the body of work that both teams have brought to the table up to this point. And I just don't see where Arkansas is able to get past that. I mean, you look at Ole Miss's defense; they've got 17 sacks this year, and when you extrapolate that to what the Arkansas offensive line issues have been, you almost sit there and say, you really hope, like you said, that KJ can put that cape on, because honest to God, that's what they're going to need.
Yeah, I wonder if the usage with Rocket is going to be different. Like, I wonder if without Luke Haas, if they're going to split him out into the slot or something like that, and try and find creative ways to get him touches, because as you mentioned earlier, having him sit back there as a pass protector, that's not a good use of Rocket's skill set. That's just not what he does particularly well. Drawing up the screens for him, I think that Ole Miss is going to be able to sniff that out a mile away. Who knows? I mean, the Arkansas offensive line has been bad enough to where maybe that's a legitimate sell. Maybe they experiment with that a little bit. But I think they're going to have to move him around the formation in order to have a chance in this one. And look, this is going to have to be a game in which you're just going to have to accept the very likely possibility that KJ is getting sacked 4 or 5 times, right? It's just, can he overcome that within a drive? Can he not turn the football over as that's happening? Can Arkansas make the best of that situation? Can they shorten the game a little bit? Ole Miss is going to want to go tempo. They're going to want to beat you in that sort of way. Not having Jackson Dart getting going with his legs, that's going to be a big part of this. Ole Miss receivers, it feels like they're always operating in such significant amounts of space. That's a group that looks like it's really coming into its own. It's going to test Arkansas on the back end. But yeah, there are just so many factors, it feels like, that are working against Arkansas on the road.
One of the matchup issues that I'm looking at also for the Ole Miss defense, they're pretty stout, it seems like, on the boundary and the near side, on the sides of the field. But it seems like that they got chewed up last week in the middle of the field, in the middle back third. And you want to see if Arkansas can possibly shorten those routes to where KJ is able to hit some guys maybe at that 10-yard mark on the outside hash, trying to find some open spaces in that Ole Miss defense, because that's what's going to take. Because whenever you have guys that for Arkansas that are not getting the space, they're also having long developing routes, which is KJ doesn't have the time, because it all is more of a catch-22. It feeds into itself, and one is predicated on the other. You have to see if Kenny Guyton and also Dan Enos can sit there and schematically form up something where they can get the ball out of KJ's hands a little faster, but in space.
I talked about that exact premise yesterday with Cole Kubelik, and one of the things that he mentioned, Arkansas really doesn't have that guy where the defense sees him catch the ball in maybe it's a little bubble screen, or it's a quick hitter to the outside, and you've got some downfield blocking working or something like that.
Yeah.
Arkansas really doesn't have that guy that scares you, that's really shifty in that spot. And that's kind of a hole in this offense right now, and with this scheme. And one of those things where I bet if Sam Pittman could have gone back in time, he would have addressed that need in the transfer portal, because instead, and it's great to have these big physical receivers that you can line up on the outside that can go up and make a play for you, that KJ can just say, hey, I trust you enough to go win me a 50-50 battle and do that. But that's kind of what they need right now. I mean, even South Carolina, a team that's dealing with that exact same issue. The offensive line is not giving them enough time for these routes to develop. They instead have had to adjust the offense with Dow Loggins, a guy that Arkansas fans obviously know very well, to be able to get those quick hitting routes on the outside. Now they have Xavier Legette, and Xavier Legette can make you terrified if you're a defense when he gets the ball in space on the outside. And when Juice Wells is healthy, he can do that same sort of thing as we saw in that touchdown that he had against Georgia. That's the element, though, that this Arkansas offense doesn't really have, and they desperately need, because, man, it just feels like it's so difficult on KJ to be able to hit some of these guys downfield, and it's really not built to what your personnel is telling you that you can do.
Yep. And that's one of the things that I am going to be particularly watching very closely, is exactly how, because Arkansas does have a wide receiver that maybe one or two, for sure one, that can get into space and has got a little bit of wiggle to him, and that's Isaiah Satania. You saw him return that punt return against BYU. You haven't really seen him being utilized. I mean, you could also even look at it and say, you know what, AJ Green, you're not getting the carries right now. Let's put you in the slot. Let's see what you can do. You've got the speed. Let's see what you can do on a mismatch, maybe with a nickel or even possibly an outside linebacker. And I'm just kind of searching right now.
You know, I think they missed Jaden Hazelwood too. That's not really getting talked about. Like that guy when he got the football in his hands, so physical, wanted to run you over. He and Brew McCoy, I will not stand, and I hope Brew McCoy is able to make a full recovery after what happened last week. The Tennessee receiver. Those are two 5-star guys that you would have no idea that they were 5 stars based on the attitude and the aggression that they play with when they get the football in their hands and when the football's not in their hands. The pride that those guys take in blocking, and George Pickens is another one that I would throw in there, like these former 5-star guys who you see them blocking. And that's another thing that Arkansas could probably use on the outside to free up some of those guys in space, is having those guys that just want to destroy you and just want to say, hey, I'm going to take this matchup head on. And I truly take pride in that area. I think that makes such a big difference for a team like Georgia, is they have so many of those guys on the outside. And that's why it looks easy sometimes when they get the ball to the edges and they get the ball to the boundaries. And it makes it look like those guys have so much room to be able to operate. And Arkansas just kind of misses that. And if they still had Hazelwood on that roster, maybe we wouldn't be having this conversation about that area of weakness.
Yeah, because whenever that's one of the things you've got to have, is that outside blocking, because that's, say for instance, you look at Western Carolina, second play from scrimmage, because first play you hit Luke Has, which Arkansas really is going to be missing for the rest of the season, because you almost look at him as like probably the best offensive weapon outside of KJ at this point that Arkansas had. And could he be a Mackey winner in the next year or two? There's a possibility. I mean, that's the reason why Nick Saban was in his house right before he signed with Arkansas, trying to convince him to go to Alabama. He understood the type of player that he was. But now you have those issues on the outside where you don't have, like you're talking about with the blocking, the physicality that you thought that might, with like a Landers, or not Landers, sorry, that was last year, Isaac Tesla, that had that physicality. That the second play from scrimmage against Western Carolina, they had their guys locked up. Jaden Wilson catches it 65 yards down the field. It feels like after that, it just kind of went away.
Yeah, it is strange. It is strange. And especially when you don't have the downfield threat like what Landers was last year, it just puts so much more pressure on your offense. It feels like this entire group has to go back to the drawing board. They just have to. They need a philosophical change to acknowledge, okay, we are now 5 games in. It's no longer, oh, we just had a bad day here, a bad day there. If you are the Arkansas coaching staff, and that goes beyond Sam Pittman and even goes beyond Dan Enos, You have to see what your strengths and weaknesses are. You should know your personnel to be able to dial up an offensive game plan that gives you a chance. That's all you can really hope for right
Yeah.
now. It didn't really feel like Arkansas had much of a chance with that offensive game plan against A&M last week. And they had much more of a chance the week prior, obviously, against LSU. And they did so many things well in that game. But this is a week-to-week league, and I think Arkansas right now has to take a long look in the mirror. Otherwise, this is heading down a very dark road, and there is definitely a world in which this season can turn into 4-8 in a hurry.
Travis Williams is. I thought about this a little bit, and he had a pretty sizable headache trying to figure out what he was going to be doing with those wide receivers at LSU and also with Jaden Daniels. But now you fast forward to this week, I think he's got an even bigger headache because you got Jackson Dart, hitting Jordan Watkins. He's got 29 receptions and 450 yards. Trey Harris is starting to have a second great season in a row, and I feel like he's more of that go-to that Jackson can hit. He's got six touchdown receptions on the year. That group that Ole Miss has is going to cause Arkansas some problems.
I think it will. They're versatile. They've got a lot of interchangeable guys. They've actually been kind of it's been a revolving door for the first month with the pass catchers. And Jackson Dart, I think to his credit, has done pretty well given the circumstances. Like the guy who was the hero in the Tulane game, Michael Trigg, who transferred from USC to Ole Miss with Jackson Dart, is no longer on the team. Looks like a guy who's taking advantage of the redshirt rule. And Trey Harris got off to that record-breaking start. He had like 3 touchdowns in the first 3.5 minutes of the season opener after he was a decorated transfer coming in from Louisiana Tech. And then he was banged up in the first quarter of that Tulane game, and he just came back last week. Dayton Wade has looked really, really good. Watkins, as you mentioned, has been phenomenal. And Sakari Franklin, a guy who was a big-time transfer coming over from UTSA, one of the biggest additions at any position in the transfer portal. Basically was out for the first month of the season. Now he's back going for them. Caden Prescore in the tight end from Memphis. They're expecting big things from as well. He's playing some big time reps for him. So they've been able to make it work despite this, kind of mixed bag. And despite the fact that Quinshon Judkins was really bottled up in those first 4 games of the season and was able to get going against LSU. So this could be an instance in which Arkansas is kind of catching Ole Miss at a bad time. And now having some of those guys back healthy, maybe Judkins is kind of over the rib injury and he's got his legs under him after having that big game last week. Offensive line's feeling really good. The timing of this matchup is certainly not ideal for Arkansas.
Yeah, because you really kind of took the words out of my mouth, because at this point, this is not probably the best time for Arkansas to be facing Ole Miss. If you face them in November, like they have in the past, I mean, I think that kind of works to their favor. But like you said, they're getting guys back. I noticed that Jackson Dart, before the LSU game, was leading the team in rushing as well. And that kind of stood out to me. I thought, okay, I know that Judkins has been hurt. Like you say, he's been dealing with the rib issue off and on here. And that's one of those injuries where there's repeated hits in that same area. And you kind of wonder what his availability will be and effectiveness during that availability, because you want to make sure that he's not only good for the Razorback game, but you want to make sure he's good through the end of November as well, because those are one of those injuries that kind of seems to linger throughout the rest of the season.
He got 33 carries last week, though, so I think he's good. I think he's over it at this point. But ask LSU fans, the more explosive runner in this game, and this is probably not something Arkansas fans want to hear, is actually Ulysses Bentley. And so it's a 3-pronged attack that they have, because when Jackson Dart has needed to, he has been pretty good with his legs this year. He was awesome in the Georgia Tech game. And he's a guy that can be a bit reckless at times. He'll hurdle. He'll try and run through you. He's not one for sliding. So maybe that creates a turnover opportunity potentially, or who knows, that can change the complexion of a football game. But they look like a team that got some mojo. Who knows if that's just the byproduct of LSU having what I think Brian Kelly said. I got this via Shea Dixon, but he's saying that there were 34 missed tackles in that football game. How much of that is because of LSU's bad defense? How much of that is because of Ole Miss's offense? I don't know, but Ole Miss is versatile, and they appear to be getting healthy in a group that looks like it is feeling good. Or maybe, who knows, maybe Lane is about to lay another egg. And after getting what was, in my opinion, the biggest win of the Kiffin era, I don't think it was beating my alma mater, Indiana, in the Outback Bowl. I think it was beating LSU at home and seeing your students rush the field. Who knows? Maybe they're going to be a little bit overconfident. Maybe they're going to be reading their own headlines too much, and Arkansas will actually catch them at the right time. You just never know.
One of the games that I'm also looking forward to this week on the SEC slate is Alabama I do believe it's at A&M.
Yep.
And I'm really intrigued because I talked to Olin Buchanan last week, and he said, you look around the A&M defense and sprinkle around are always all these 4 and 5 star guys, which gave Arkansas problems last week. I wonder how much they're going to be able to expose Jalen Milroe in that offense, because you look at Saban's offensive line, they've had some issues throughout the season trying to get everybody, set spots, trying to, get consistency up there, because after the whole Texas debacle, I feel like they kind of went back to square one a little bit. But this week, I wonder if this is the week where it just kind of all falls apart for Jalen Milroe and that offense.
Kind of fell apart last year in this game. That was his first career start. Was against A&M, and it was in Tuscaloosa. Bama was a 3-touchdown favorite, and he had 3 turnovers in the first half of that game. He had 2 times in which he had a turnover via strip sack, and he had a pick. And they were a competent goal line call away from losing that football game to an A&M team that was lost and had no business being on the field with Alabama last year. And so now this year, with this game in College Station against an A&M defense that looks very much improved since the mess that was the Miami game, it's fascinating for the Jalen Milroe arc of his career. If he comes out and looks like a guy who is still turning the football over, he still makes those costly mistakes with an interception locked in on his first read, Tommy Rees doesn't trust him to throw the football, there is definitely a possibility that A&M all of a sudden is looking up with a 2-score lead and is feeling really good about its chances to close out Alabama. Now, where I would push back a little bit is I think that Milroe last week showed a sign that he can process a defense that is atypical, the 3-3-5 that Zach Arnett and Mississippi State play, and he can have a turnover-free ball game. Now, he's still going to take his sacks, right? We talk about that with KJ as well. Like, just assume he's going to get sacked 4 or 5 times in a game. Just assume that Jalen Milroe is going to do that. He's been sacked at least 4 times in every start he's had in his career against Power 5 competition. I don't think the Bama offensive line is going to be able to stop that A&M front enough to be able to prevent that from continuing. But where I think the difference can be made is his poise. He's used to getting off to these slow starts at this point. Did it against Ole Miss. Did it last week. Did it last week to a certain extent. His second completed pass game with 5 minutes left in the second quarter of that game against Mississippi State. And, had a slow start, obviously, against Texas, and then got going in the third quarter. He's got the best quarterback rating in the country in the third quarter. I wonder if that helps him in a game like this, even with a crowd that is going to be very much into this one and could be feeling good if A&M gets out to an early lead. If that poise from Jalen Milroe, who has now been in enough of these spots, he's been benched during this season, has had to come back. I wonder if that gives him enough of a mental edge to kind of keep his head in the right place and get Alabama enough to be able to get out of College Station with a win.
And also being able to battle those cowbells in the second half too. That was just it's so annoying hearing it on TV, because I watched that game too, and he looked very kind of, I wouldn't say sluggish, because he's not a sluggish guy. I just felt like him operating the offense looked sluggish in the first half. In the second half, they kind of made some adjustments on what Mississippi State was doing, and they put him in some better spots to make some more efficient plays downfield for him. So I'm curious to see how that's going to work out next week or this week against that A&M defense.
Yeah, they're still searching for that guy receiver. That's the other part of this too. Bama looks like a team that's just got a bunch of number 3 receivers. They don't have that number 1. And in a game like this, you would love to be able to have that guy that you can trust in space and say, oh, Jermaine Burton. Oh, I need to get Isaiah Bond. I need to get Jalen Hale. Like, I need to get one of these guys when it's 3rd and 10 and I'm facing pressure, and I can have that guy that I can just go to and the crowd is rocking. And they don't have that. They just don't. And that's what's so different about watching Bama this year and really last year as well, compared to the teams that we've been so accustomed to watching and all the great talent that they have had at receiver, unprecedented run really of receiver. And they just do not have that. And I wonder how that impacts them in a game like this.
Yeah, you could really make a case that Jalen Milroe would love to have JoJo Earl back about this time right now. So
a lot of guys he probably loved it to have on their roster. Look, some of them just didn't really work out as well. And I think Bama thought they were going to be better in the portal. The preseason love that Jermaine Burton continues to get year after year just blows my mind. I think he is what he is at this point of his career, but for whatever reason, people want to make him out to be like he's an all SEC receiver. That's just not who he is. And that's fine. He can still be a contributing guy. He's just not necessarily that go-to guy that Bama fans were hoping was going to step into some Jameson Williams type role. That's just not who he is.
No. One of the games that this, Alabama A&M game is kind of overshadowing is Kentucky and Georgia. That's going to be a hell of a matchup this weekend.
Yeah, I can't wait to see that. I think that there are a lot of Kentucky fans that, and I know the program very well. They've been kind to me over the years. My brother lives in Lexington. My sister-in-law works at the school. My personal doppelganger is Liam Cohen, Kentucky offensive coordinator. Like I feel like I know the program and have a pretty good bead on where they're at right now. And even coming off of the Florida game, I think Kentucky fans are feeling good about their ground game, what they saw from Ray Davis having the single best game of any FBS running back this season, 280 yards. It's a pretty good Florida run defense. I think they feel good about the big blue wall. The fact that the timing lines up the way that it has with Georgia having its worst game defending the run in 5 years. I think that makes them feel like, hey, we might have a chance in this one. I would push back on that a little bit because I think that this Georgia defensive staff is as good as there is in college football, and they're going to make those adjustments. I think Kirby Smart, Will Muschamp, Glenn Schumann, Trey Scott's tremendously underrated coaching that defensive line. I think they're going to make those adjustments. And I think they're going to say, you know what? I know that we got torched for 61 yards by Peyton Thorne early on. I know that we had our issues defending that Auburn ground game. We're not going to let Kentucky do that. I don't think that they're going to do that in consecutive weeks. Georgia has not trailed to Kentucky at any point in a football game since 2017. They haven't trailed by a touchdown since 2016, year one of the Kirby Smart era. They have dominated this rivalry. Interestingly enough, I got this from one of my Georgia buddies, Perry. He said that the last time that Georgia has lost at home at night was 2009 to Kentucky, ironically enough.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that crazy? 14 years we're talking about here. So, yeah, I mean, I took Georgia in the points in my picks leading up to this one. But it is fascinating because, look, Georgia has had consecutive games against SEC competition, the only Power 5 games they played this year, in which they've trailed by double digits in the first half. Previous 2 years, 30-game sample size wherein they won 2 national championships. They only had 2 such instances. So it is significant, and teams are feeling like, hey, you know what? Maybe we can hang with Georgia and feel like we at least have a chance. One thing goes our way. Who knows? That's the position that Georgia has put itself in the first part of the schedule.
Yep. One of the and I'll get you out of here on this too. I think my upset alert for the weekend is going to be Vanderbilt at Florida. I don't know. I just have one of those feelings where Florida, Napier got them up to, got them in the top 25, and then they had that clunker again last week against Kentucky. I feel like it's more of a letdown for them. They've got Vanderbilt coming in, and Clark Lee, he just seems like he can rally those troops that he's got. I know that he's had some hard sledding in the SEC, the first part of this season with their slate, but I don't know. This could be a point where they could turn it around and say, you know what, this is where our mark starts.
God help Florida if that's what happens this weekend. Look, I've been banging the drum. They're not paying Billy Napier $31 million to stop coaching football. They're just not. No. But if they lose consecutive years to Vandy, that would hit a little bit differently, especially after the way that his week started, wherein he was kind of pushing back on the criticism about the offense. And you just want to say to him, hey, like, you realize you're getting paid $7 million. You are an offensive play caller. You are the last remaining SEC head coach who was also calling offensive plays. I guess Hugh Freeze dabbled in that last week when it's been a little bit touch and go with Philip Montgomery, but still as the primary play caller. And you have the worst ranked offense in the SEC. You're only averaging 25 points per game, and you're coming off a dud, an absolute dud against Kentucky. And in both of your road games, you've looked incredibly sloppy. It's perfectly fair to question them. I think they get up for this one. Even if Trevor Etienne isn't able to go, I still think that they get up for this one and they bounce back. They've been really good at home. I mean, they've obviously the Charlotte game was pretty underwhelming. I think some of that was by design to have Trevor Etienne get some rest after a very heavy workload that he had against Tennessee. I think they get up for this one. If Florida loses this one at home to Vandy, man, like we're about to see a different level of DEF CON in Gainesville.
Oh my God, yeah, that is true. And I will say this though, with that being a 3 p.m. kick, you don't know, because if it was 11 a.m., I would favor probably Vanderbilt even more, because those 11 a.m. starts at home always favor the away team. Usually, it seems like, because it seems like the away teams can kind of step up just a little bit more. But we'll see what happens. Like you said, though, if they do lose in consecutive years, it's going to be maybe DEFCON 1, maybe DEFCON 2 at that point.
Which one's the worst? Is DEFCON 5 the lightest one, and DEFCON 1 is the worst? That's why I didn't want to go into those details. That's a Booker McFarland thing.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, Connor, I really appreciate you coming on with me today, and I'm glad that we were able to get on here and talk some football. And it's always great to see you again, my man.
Absolutely. Appreciate you having me.
No problem. Y'all, and this has been a Hogville.net YouTube live special with Saturday Down South's Connor O'Gara. I wanted to thank y'all for jumping on with me today, and y'all have a great one.